Welcome to the 1 Hour Guide by Anil Nathu.
Great to be here.
Today we're embarking on a deep dive into Smarter, Faster, Better, The Secrets of Being Productive 1 Hour Guide by Charles Duhigg.
Right, a really fascinating book.
Absolutely. Our goal isn't just to, tell you what's in the book. We want to extract the core insights from each chapter.
And explore how you, the listener, can actually use them. Boost your own productivity.
Exactly. Think of this as your personal guide to understanding the mechanics of how we get things done, all thanks to the wisdom distilled in this 1 Hour Guide by Anil Nathu.
Yeah, what's so powerful about Duhigg's work, and the way it's laid out in the 1 Hour Guide by Neil Nathu, is that it goes beyond just like simple time management hacks. It really digs into the psychology, the underlying forces that drive our effectiveness.
So where does he start?
Well, the first chapter tackles motivation, and it offers a surprisingly empowering perspective.
Okay, let's dive right into Motivation Chapter 1 then. One of the immediate takeaways for me was that motivation isn't this, mystical force you're either born with or not.
Exactly. It's framed as a skill, something we can actually develop.
He opens with that story of Robert Philippe, right? The guy who lost his motivation after a brain injury.
Yeah, a really stark illustration. But then he pivots to Mauricio Delgado's research.
Ah, the experiment with the rigged game.
That's the one. Even when people knew the game was rigged, their reward centers lit up when they got to make the choice.
So what's that telling us?
It points to this fundamental human need, the feeling of control, agency.
Right.
Even if the outcome is sort of predetermined, the mere act of choosing, of making a decision, that activates our brain's reward system. It fuels motivation.
That's the internal locus of control idea then, believing your actions matter.
Precisely. Believing you have an impact on what happens. So the practical question is, how do we cultivate that feeling?
Yeah, how do we use this? Duhigg gives that great example of the Marine Corps under General Krulak.
Redesigning training.
By giving recruits these seemingly small choices within a super rigid system, like how to arrange their gear or whatever.
It fostered a stronger sense of ownership, deeper motivation. It seems counterintuitive, but it worked.
It really does. So if someone listening feels like their motivation is, flagging, what's a practical first step based on this chapter?
Well, the 1 Hour Guide breaks it down nicely. First, look for small areas where you can inject some control. Any task, any project.
Like breaking down a big project.
Exactly. Break it into smaller pieces, and then you decide the order. Even that small choice helps. Second, consciously connect the task to your personal values.
Like the Marines asking why.
Yeah, why am I doing this? How does this specific action link to something bigger that I care about? Ask yourself that.
That makes so much sense. It shifts the focus from just the what to the why. And the book also mentions reinforcing decision-making as a habit.
Absolutely. Every time you make a choice, even a small one, and see a positive result, it reinforces that sense of control. It strengthens the motivational muscle, so to speak.
So acknowledge the effort.
Acknowledge the effort. Acknowledge the decision you made. And Duhigg uses that nursing home example too, giving residents more say in their daily routines.
Even small acts of rebellion, as he put it.
Right. They boosted well-being, engagement, and finally, practice these things in contexts you find emotionally rewarding. Think about Viola Philippe helping Robert re-engage.
So these principles, control, values, reinforcing choices, they apply everywhere. Classrooms, workplaces, at home.
Pretty much anywhere you want to build motivation. Yeah. It's about understanding the internal triggers.
Okay, powerful stuff. Let's move on to Chapter 2, Teams. This shifts the focus from the individual to, the group dynamic.
Indeed. And it starts with Julia Rosofsky's experience at Google, Project Aristotle.
Right, trying to figure out what makes the perfect team.
And the finding was pretty surprising. It wasn't necessarily who was on the team.
Not the mix of superstars.
Less critical than how the team operated, how they interacted. Team norms were the key predictors of success.
I found this part fascinating. They looked at, over 180 teams?
Yeah, a huge data set.
And factors like conversational turn-taking, basically. Did everyone get a chance to speak? And something called social sensitivity were crucial. What's social sensitivity?
It's essentially the team members' ability to pick up on each other's emotional cues. Reading the room, understanding how others are feeling, responding appropriately.
So being attuned to your teammates.
Exactly. And that directly leads to what they called psychological safety, which turned out to be the big one.
Define that for us.
It's a shared belief within the team that it's safe to take interpersonal risks. You can voice a crazy idea, ask a question, admit a mistake, or challenge something without fear of being shut down, embarrassed, or punished.
That contrast between the two Google teams in the book really drove it home. The one full of high achievers, but, well, kind of cold.
Yeah, efficient but distant.
They didn't perform as well as the other team, which seemed maybe more chaotic on the surface, but had that supportive vibe.
That psychological safety. It allows people to bring their whole selves, their best ideas, without holding back. It reminded me of the Saturday Night Live example, too.
Lorne Michaels fostering that collaborative, sometimes messy, but ultimately safe space for creativity.
Right. So for someone trying to build a better team, where do they start?
What are the steps?
Okay, the 1 Hour Guide pulls out 6 key actions. First, actively foster equality in conversations. Maybe even track who's speaking, make sure everyone's voice is heard.
Consciously create space for quieter members.
Precisely. Second, promote that social sensitivity. Encourage people to check in, pay attention to nonverbal cues, ask how colleagues are doing. Third, establish norms that explicitly support risk-taking.
How do you do that?
Maybe reward honest feedback, even if it's critical. Frame mistakes as learning opportunities. Show it's okay not to have all the answers.
So it's really about building that culture brick by brick. What else?
Fourth, model the behavior yourself. If you're a leader, listen actively, show empathy, admit your own mistakes. Fifth, recognize and reinforce team contributions. Help people see how their specific work fits into the bigger picture.
Connect it to the overall goals.
Yes. And finally, create space for informal interaction. Water cooler chat isn't wasted time. Casual conversations build trust and rapport, which are the bedrock of psychological safety.
It really hammers home that team dynamics can matter more than just individual talent.
Absolutely. It's about how the pieces fit and work together.
Okay, powerful transition to chapter 3. Focus. This one starts with a pretty sobering story. Air France Flight 447.
Yeah, a truly tragic example of what can happen when focus breaks down under pressure. It illustrates cognitive tunneling.
Explain that term.
It's when our attention becomes intensely fixated on one specific thing, often something minor or misleading, and we completely miss the bigger picture, the critical information right in front of us.
So the pilots got fixated on the airspeed readings.
Exactly. They obsessed over those faulty readings and failed to recognize the fundamental issue the plane was stalling. It shows just how fragile focus can be.
But the book also looks at the flip side, right? How experts, like firefighters, do maintain focus in chaotic situations.
Yes, it explores research by Klein Associates on people who perform well under extreme stress. And a key concept that emerges is mental models.
Okay, mental models. What are they exactly?
Think of them as internalized narratives or frameworks. Stories we tell ourselves about how things work, what's likely to happen next. They help us filter information, anticipate events, and make sense of complex situations quickly.
So a firefighter has a mental model of how a fire behaves.
Right, which helps them predict where the danger is, what needs to happen next, and where to direct their attention.
Makes sense. So how can we, in our everyday work and lives, build better mental models to improve our focus?
The 1 Hour Guide gives us 5 strategies. First, consciously build these models. Before a meeting, visualize different outcomes. Before starting a task, think through the steps, potential obstacles.
Sort of pre-playing it in your head.
Exactly. Second, narrate the situation to yourself as it unfolds. Verbalizing what you're doing and seeing can keep you grounded and help you spot anomalies, like a nurse talking through the steps of a procedure.
Keeps you present?
Third, practice perspective shifts. Actively try to see the situation from different angles. Firefighters rehearse various scenarios to build this flexibility.
Okay, visualize, narrate, shift perspective. What else?
Fourth, anticipate disruptions. Think ahead about what might interrupt you or derail your focus and have a plan for how you'll handle it. Pilots review emergency protocols. We can think about how we'll handle emails or calls when we need to concentrate.
Proactive planning for distraction.
And finally, reframe information in context. Don't just look at isolated data points. Try to weave them into a larger story. What does this piece of information mean in the grand scheme of things? Focus, ultimately, is a skill built on narrative and situational awareness.
It's something you construct, not just something you have. Very useful. Chapter 4 moves on to goal setting. And this presents a really interesting tension, or maybe a partnership, between big, ambitious goals and more grounded, specific ones.
Right. The book argues for needing both. Stretch goals, those big, hairy, audacious goals that inspire you, and SMART goals.
SMART being specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, time-bound. The classic acronym.
Exactly. Duhigg uses his own experience writing the book as an example. The stretch goal was writing a successful book. The SMART goals were things like write 500 words today or finish chapter research by Friday.
But he also warns about relying only on SMART goals, doesn't he?
Yes, that's crucial. He introduces the idea of cognitive closure,
Which
the
is?
tendency to latch onto the specific, measurable aspects of a SMART goal and just focus on checking the box, sometimes losing sight of the reason you set the goal in the first place or missing unexpected opportunities.
Like the GE example from the 80s, where focusing too narrowly on hitting specific metrics sometimes led managers to make less strategic decisions overall.
Precisely. They optimized for the metric, not necessarily the underlying objective.
Mm.
So the challenge is finding that balance.
So how do we do that? How do we blend the big picture with the practical steps?
Okay, the 1 Hour Guide lays out a 7-step process. First, always start by defining the stretch goal. What's the big motivating aspiration?
Get the why clear first.
Exactly. Then break that down into specific SMART goals. These are your stepping stones. But, and this is key, ensure each SMART goal is genuinely achievable and realistic. Consider your resources, time constraints.
Don't set yourself up to fail.
Right. Then set a clear timeline for each objective. Create that sense of urgency and a framework for progress.
Okay, stretch goal, SMART breakdown, realistic, timeline. What else?
Use these goals to guide your daily and weekly planning. Constantly ask, is what I'm doing today moving me towards my SMART goal, and does that SMART goal still serve my stretch goal? Sixth, actively watch out for goal distortion. Regularly check if the goals still feel meaningful. Are you just chasing metrics, or is the underlying purpose still intact? Be willing to adjust if needed. And finally, encourage big thinking alongside the structure. GE's workouts were an example of fostering creative problem solving within that goal-driven culture.
So it's structure and flexibility.
It has to be both. And that historical example of the Yom Kippur War is a chilling reminder of how badly defined goals and cognitive closure can lead to disaster.
A really important balance to strike. Okay, chapter 5, managing others. This takes us into leadership, using that incredible story of the FBI rescuing Frank Jansen.
Yeah, a really compelling case study. The success wasn't down to some single heroic leader dictating orders from the top.
No, it seemed much more distributed.
Exactly. It showcased agile management. The key was pushing decision-making authority down the chain, empowering the agents on the ground who had the best, most current information.
Because they were closest to the action.
Right. And that only works if you have a culture of trust and, again, psychological safety. People need to feel empowered to act.
So the 1 Hour Guide pulls out some core principles for effective management from this.
Yes, 7 key steps. First, as we said, push decision-making authority to the front lines. Empower your people.
Trust them.
Build that culture of psychological safety and trust. Open communication is vital. Third, emphasize transparency. Make sure everyone understands the shared objectives, the overall mission.
So everyone's pulling in the same direction, even if they're making decisions locally.
Precisely. Fourth, encourage initiative by showing respect for expertise. Recognize that different people have different skills and insights. Let them use them.
Don't micromanage.
Definitely not. Fifth, create fast feedback loops. You need ways to quickly learn what's working, what isn't, and adapt your strategy. Sixth, establish redundancy without creating stifling bureaucracy.
Yeah.
Have backups, but keep things agile.
Backup plans, not excessive red tape.
Exactly. And finally, especially under pressure, constantly reinforce the purpose and maintain morale. Remind the team why their work matters. Connect them back to the mission. The FBI story really shows that great management is often about enabling and trusting your team, not just directing them.
Empowering people, basically. Makes sense. Okay, chapter 6 brings us to decision-making, and here we meet professional poker player Annie Duke.
Right. Annie Duke is a great example because poker is all about making high-stakes decisions with incomplete information. You never know exactly what cards your opponents hold.
So how does she approach it?
She thinks probabilistically. She's not looking for certainty, because it doesn't exist in poker. Instead, she's constantly calculating the odds, the probabilities of different outcomes based on the limited information she does have.
Trying to make the best bet given probabilities.
Exactly. It's about making calculated risks. This ties into Bayesian thinking, the idea of starting with an initial belief or probability and then continuously updating it as new evidence comes in.
The book also mentions the Good Judgment Project, right? Where analysts got surprisingly good at forecasting world events.
Yeah, and they do it using similar principles. Probabilistic forecasting, constantly updating their predictions based on new information, being aware of their own biases.
So how can the rest of us who aren't poker pros or intelligence analysts apply this kind of thinking to our, everyday decisions, deciding whether to take a new job or even just where to go for lunch.
Maybe not lunch. But for bigger decisions, the 1-hour guide offers 6 practical steps. First, consciously envision multiple possible futures. Don't just fixate on the one outcome you want. What are the different ways this could play out?
Consider the alternatives.
Yes. Second, try to assign rough probabilities to each scenario, even if it's just high, medium, low.
Yeah.
This forces you to be more objective about likelihoods. Third, actively seek out more data to refine those probabilities. Talk to people, do some research, look at past experiences.
Don't just rely on your gut feeling.
Right. Gather evidence. Fourth, explicitly accept and work within uncertainty. No decision is guaranteed. Acknowledge the unknowns. Fifth, where possible, use small bets or incremental steps.
Like testing the waters.
Exactly. Instead of quitting your job to launch a business, maybe start it as a side project. Test your career change idea with freelance work first. Make small, reversible commitments before going all in.
Reduces the risk.
And finally, write down your thinking. Articulate your reasoning, your assumptions, the probabilities you assigned. This helps clarify your thoughts and can reveal flaws or biases you weren't aware of. It's about being more structured and evidence-based in how we choose.
Thinking in bets, essentially. Fascinating. Okay, Chapter 7 tackles innovation, and it uses the story behind Disney's Frozen.
Yes, which is great because Frozen had a really difficult development process. It wasn't this smooth, linear path to success.
Then he really got shelved, right?
It did. And the book argues that the breakthrough came from a combination of things: intense critique, creative pressure, and crucially, bringing in fresh perspectives that helped recombine existing ideas in a new way.
Like making Elsa and Anna sisters.
Exactly. That shift unlocked the whole story. The chapter highlights the role of innovation brokers, people or concepts that bridge different worlds, connecting disparate ideas to create something new.
So innovation isn't just about lone geniuses having sudden epiphanies.
Not usually. It's often about connection, recombination, and structured problem-solving under pressure. So how can we encourage this?
Yeah, what are the steps to foster innovation?
The 1-hour guide suggests 5 approaches. First, become more sensitive to your own experiences and reactions. Pay attention to your frustrations, your moments of insight, your emotional responses. Sometimes the seeds of innovation are right there.
Tune into your own observations.
Yes. Second, embrace creative desperation. Sometimes facing a constraint or a deadline can actually force you to think more creatively. Use pressure constructively. Third, maintain critical distance, even after a breakthrough.
Don't fall in love with your first good idea.
Right. Keep questioning, keep refining, avoid complacency. Fourth, deliberately use disturbance as a creative tool. Introduce new elements, constraints, or perspectives to shake things up and force new thinking patterns.
Stir the pot a little.
Kind of, yeah. And fifth, actively act as an innovation broker. Look for ideas in unrelated fields. Read widely. Talk to people outside your usual circles. Try to connect concepts from different domains. It's about structured creativity, as Ed Catmull says.
Problem solving, not magic. I like that. Okay, final chapter, Chapter 8, absorbing data. This seems especially relevant today with information overload being such a common problem.
Absolutely. And it uses the example of South Avondale Elementary School,
where they had tons of data about students, but it wasn't actually helping improve performance initially.
Exactly. They had these fancy dashboards, lots of metrics, but teachers felt overwhelmed. It was a classic case of information blindness.
Yeah.
So much data, so little actual insight.
So what changed?
They shifted to much more manual, hands-on methods, things like the hot pencil drill, where teachers physically plotted student progress on charts, or graphing data together on big sheets of butcher paper.
Seems incredibly low-tech, almost backward. Why did that work better?
Duhigg introduces the concept of disfluency. It's the idea that making information slightly harder to process initially can actually force deeper engagement and lead to better understanding and retention.
Wait, making it harder helps you learn it better.
Counterintuitive, right. But the manual methods force the teachers to interact with the data, to manipulate it, to look for patterns themselves rather than just passively consuming a pre-digested report. That active engagement made the information stick.
They had to wrestle with it.
Exactly. So how do we absorb data more effectively, avoiding that information blindness?
What are the steps from the guide?
6 key ideas. First, embrace disfluency. Find ways to actively engage with information. Don't just consume it passively. Maybe take notes by hand. Try explaining it to someone else. Create your own summaries.
Make it active.
Second, break data down into manageable scaffolds. Organize complex information into simpler categories or frameworks that make sense to you. Third, interact with data through experiments. Form hypotheses about what the data might show, then test them.
Be a scientist with your data.
Sort of, yeah. Fourth, embed learning within contextual tasks. Don't just look at data in isolation. Use it to make actual decisions or solve real problems you're facing. Apply it.
Makes it relevant.
Fifth, recognize the limits of passive information. Just reading a report or looking at a dashboard isn't enough. Focus on interpretation and sense-making. And finally, create shared data practices. Talk about the data with colleagues. Analyze it together. Different perspectives can unlock deeper insights.
So it's not about having more data, it's about doing more with the data.
That's the core message. Understanding how to use data is far more valuable than just collecting terabytes of it. It's about transforming data into actionable insight.
Fantastic. So bringing it all together, this deep dive into smarter, faster, better, guided by the insights in the 1-Hour Guide by Anil Nathu, has given us these 8 pillars of productivity: motivation,
Kings,
focus,
goal setting,
managing others,
decision-making,
innovation,
and absorbing data.
and the underlying thread through all of them seems to be that productivity isn't just about brute force or managing time better. It's fundamentally about understanding our own mind.
Exactly. It's about making smarter choices, building better mental habits, and harnessing the psychology of how we work best. The 1-Hour Guide by Anil Nathu really provides that actionable framework.
It's about working smarter, not just harder. A powerful set of ideas.
Definitely food for thought.
Thank you for joining us today. Buy the book at the 1-Hour Guide website for more business insights.